23 black actors who lost a child in a tragic accident. Hollywood celebrates strength, but rarely stays to witness the cost of it. Behind awards, applause, and iconic performances, some of Black America's most respected legends carry a grief no spotlight can soften. This is not a story about fame, it's about loss, silence, and the moments the cameras never captured. Today, we look beyond headlines to confront a question few are comfortable asking. How much pain is hidden behind Black excellence? Watch closely, listen deeply, and decide for yourself. If stories like this matter, stay with Black excellence legends and join the conversation that others avoid. O.J. Simpson. Before courtrooms, controversies, and history's harsh judgments, O.J. Simpson was first a father, standing at the edge of an unbearable silence. In the summer of 1979, far from cameras and roaring crowds, his life shattered in a way no fame could repair. Erin Simpson, his 2-year-old daughter, slipped beneath the surface of the family's backyard swimming pool. It took only a moment, the kind of moment that feels harmless until it isn't. By the time adults noticed, the water had already stolen something precious. Rushed to the hospital and placed on life support, Erin never regained consciousness. Doctors later confirmed what no parent is prepared to hear. There was no recovery, no miracle waiting. Simpson was away when it happened. He returned not as a sports icon or television personality, but as a man stripped of every title. Witnesses later recalled the image of a father holding a lifeless child, frozen between disbelief and devastation. The house that once echoed with laughter became unbearably quiet. Unlike many public tragedies, this loss unfolded without spectacle. Simpson rarely spoke about it, choosing silence over explanation. Those close to him noticed subtle changes, a withdrawn gaze, a heaviness that followed him even in moments of celebration. Success continued, but something vital had been removed, leaving a permanent fracture beneath the surface. The death of Erin Simpson stands as one of the earliest and most defining wounds in his life. It reminds us that long before public opinion formed its verdict, grief had already rewritten his story. Some losses don't announce themselves to the world. They live quietly, shaping every step forward long after the headlines fade. Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was once defined by raw power, a man whose presence alone could silence arenas and terrify opponents before the first punch landed. Yet the most devastating blow of his life came far from the ring, delivered without warning, and with no chance to defend himself. In May 2009, Tyson's 4-year-old daughter, Exodus, was playing inside her home in Phoenix, Arizona. What should have been a safe, ordinary afternoon turned fatal in seconds. A loose cord attached to a treadmill formed a deadly loop, tightening around her neck, while no one realized the danger unfolding. There was no chaos, no immediate alarm, only a sudden cry when it was already too late. Exodus was rushed to the hospital, clinging faintly to life. Doctors fought through the night, but the outcome was inevitable. By the next day, she was gone. Tyson, who had been in Las Vegas at the time, raced back in desperation. Arriving after the moment every parent longs for had already passed. He never got to say goodbye. The aftermath changed him profoundly. The bravado vanished, interviews stopped, public appearances became rare. Those close to Tyson described a man hollowed out, struggling to breathe beneath a weight no championship belt could counterbalance. He later admitted that this loss forced him to confront pain without anger, without violence, only silence. Unlike defeats in boxing, there was no rematch, no redemption arc. The tragedy reshaped his understanding of strength, stripping him down to something fragile and human. Mike Tyson survived countless battles in his career, but the death of his daughter became the one fight he could never win. A reminder that even the strongest men can be undone by a single, irreversible moment. Bill Cosby. For decades, Bill Cosby was presented as the embodiment of trust, a smiling figure who represented warmth, wisdom, and stability in American households. On screen, he played the perfect father. Witnesses later described a father who seemed stunned, as if reality itself had fractured. Unlike public scandals, this tragedy stripped away performance. Cosby continued appearing on stage, continued fulfilling obligations, but something fundamental had shifted. Laughter no longer carried the same weight. In rare reflections, he admitted that grief had altered how he saw the world, not through fear, but through a constant awareness of loss. Ennis Cosby's death did not occur under bright lights or dramatic circumstances. It happened quietly, violently, and without logic. For Bill Cosby, the man once known as America's dad, the loss of his son became a private reckoning, a reminder that even those who teach comfort cannot escape the sharpest forms of pain. Ben Vereen. Ben Vereen built his legacy on movement, a performer whose body spoke before his voice ever needed to. From Broadway stages to television screens, he radiated discipline, control, and joy. Yet the most devastating interruption of his life arrived not under a spotlight, but on an ordinary road. In 1987, Vereen's teenage daughter, Taraja Vereen, was traveling with her mother when their car was struck in a violent collision. The impact was unforgiving. Taraja did not survive. She was only 16 years old, an age defined by becoming, not ending. News of her death reached Vereen while he was working, forcing him to confront grief without warning or preparation. Those close to him recall a man suddenly unanchored. Vereen did not collapse publicly, nor did he retreat into spectacle. Instead, he carried the loss inward, allowing it to reshape his understanding of purpose. The man known for grace and rhythm found himself navigating a silence where music could not reach. Unlike tragedies that invite controversy or headlines, this loss unfolded quietly. There were no court battles, no public villains, only absence. Vereen later spoke of how fatherhood had grounded him, and how losing a child dismantled assumptions he once held about control and destiny. Faith, once a background presence, became central to survival. What makes Ben Vereen's story distinct is restraint. He did not turn sorrow into performance. He did not monetize pain. Instead, he returned to his craft slowly, carefully, allowing work to become a form of discipline rather than escape. Taraja Vereen's life ended in a moment, but her absence became permanent. For Ben Vereen, every step taken afterward carried the weight of someone missing, a reminder that even the most gifted performers must sometimes learn how to stand still in grief. Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown's career was defined by sound, a voice that carried swagger, vulnerability, and chaos in equal measure. Long before tragedy struck, his life had already been shaped by fame's excesses. But nothing prepared him for the moment when loss arrived not as scandal, but as silence. In January 2015, his daughter Bobby Christina Brown was found unresponsive in a bathtub at her home in Georgia. She was just 21 years old. The discovery instantly echoed the death of her mother, Whitney Houston, 3 years earlier, creating a haunting parallel that the public could not ignore. Bobby Christina was rushed to the hospital and placed in a medically induced coma, suspended between life and departure. For nearly 6 months, Bobby Brown lived in uncertainty. Each day brought hope and dread in equal parts. He prayed publicly, pleaded privately, and remained by his daughter's side as machines did the breathing she no longer could. Unlike courtroom drama or tabloid spectacle, this waiting was slow, exhausting, and cruel in its ambiguity. In July 2015, Bobby Christina passed away after being moved to hospice care. Brown later described the loss as something that never recedes, a constant presence rather than a moment in time. He admitted that grief arrived in waves, unpredictable and overwhelming, reshaping how he understood fatherhood, responsibility, and survival. What distinguishes Bobby Brown's tragedy is repetition. He did not endure a single catastrophic loss, but a painful echo of one already endured. The resemblance between mother and daughter's deaths turned mourning into an open wound, forcing him to confront trauma layered upon trauma. Julius Erving. Julius Erving was celebrated for flight, a man who seemed to defy gravity, gliding through the air with elegance that redefined basketball. Fans called him Dr. J, a symbol of control, creativity, and confidence. Yet the most devastating fall of his life did not happen on a court. It came quietly, without an audience. In May 2000, Erving's eldest son, Corey Erving, was killed in a single car crash in Massachusetts. He was just 29 years old. Authorities later determined that the vehicle veered off the road at high speed, ending a life shaped by promise and complicated by struggle. The news reached Erving like a rupture, sudden, irreversible, and final. Corey's relationship with his father had not been simple. Julius Erving had spoken openly about distance, regret, and the difficulty of balancing public success with private presence. That complexity made the loss heavier, layered with unanswered questions and unspoken words. There would be no opportunity for repair, no future conversation to redefine their bond. Unlike the roar of arenas, this grief unfolded in near silence. Erving withdrew from visibility, choosing reflection over explanation. Those close to him described a man forced to confront not only death, but accountability, the painful awareness of what time does not allow once it is gone. In later years, Erving acknowledged that losing Corey reshaped his understanding of fatherhood. Achievements, records, and legacy suddenly felt fragile. What endured was not applause, but memory, imperfect, persistent, and unresolved. George Benson. George Benson's life has always been guided by harmony, a musician whose guitar phrasing felt conversational, intimate, and precise. His career unfolded through melody and restraint, earning him respect far beyond commercial success. Yet the most dissonant moment of his life arrived without music, rhythm, or warning. In the early 1990s, Benson experienced a loss that would permanently alter his private world. His young son was killed during a violent incident involving a firearm. Details surrounding the tragedy were never fully embraced by the public, largely because Benson chose silence over exposure. What remained undeniable was the outcome: a parent outliving a child under circumstances marked by sudden brutality. Those close to Benson described a profound shift. The man once defined by smooth optimism grew noticeably more guarded. Performances continued, albums were completed, but something intangible had changed. His playing became more reflective, less outwardly celebratory, as if each note carried an added weight of remembrance. Unlike many public figures, Benson resisted transforming grief into narrative. He avoided interviews that sought spectacle and declined to contextualize the loss through commentary. Faith, family, and discipline became his refuge. Music, once a space of freedom, evolved into a place of quiet endurance rather than escape. The death of a child does not announce itself with clarity. There are no explanations sufficient enough, no lessons that feel adequate. For Benson, the tragedy stripped life of illusion, replacing certainty with acceptance. Not peace, but persistence. Charlie Wilson. Charlie Wilson's voice carried survival. As the frontman of the Gap Band, his sound was resilient, joyful, and unmistakably alive. After years marked by addiction and recovery, Wilson rebuilt himself through faith, discipline, and music. Yet one loss arrived that no comeback narrative could soften. In 2015, Wilson's daughter, Shanna Leanne Wilson, passed away at just 23 years old following a sudden medical crisis linked to complications from diabetes. There was no long public battle, no gradual farewell, only a moment where life shifted permanently. For a father who had already confronted his own mortality, the shock was devastating in a different way: quiet, internal, and irreversible. Wilson spoke of the experience not with spectacle, but with restraint. He described the pain as disorienting, the kind that interrupts thought and reshapes time. Unlike struggles he could fight, addiction, failure, obscurity. This loss offered no opponent and no strategy. It simply existed. Those close to him noted a change in how Wilson approached both music and faith. Performances continued, but with an added gravity. Gratitude became explicit, joy more deliberate. He often spoke about living consciously, aware that moments are never guaranteed, even for those who believe they have endured the worst already. What makes Charlie Wilson's grief distinctive is context. He had survived collapse, rebuilt a legacy, and become a symbol of perseverance. Losing his daughter dismantled the illusion that resilience equals protection. Recovery teaches endurance, not immunity. Master P. Master P built an empire from structure. Known for discipline, strategy, and relentless work ethic, he transformed personal hardship into business success, becoming a symbol of control in an industry often defined by chaos. Yet the loss that shattered him most could not be managed, planned, or prevented. In May 2022, his daughter, Titiana Miller, died at the age of 29. The circumstances surrounding her passing were deeply personal and devastating, later confirmed to involve struggles with mental health. For Master P, this was not a public controversy or a professional setback. It was the collapse of something sacred. Unlike losses caused by sudden accidents or external violence, this tragedy unfolded internally, quietly, and painfully. Master P spoke openly afterward, not as a mogul or artist, but as a father confronting helplessness. He acknowledged the difficulty of recognizing unseen battles and the weight of questioning what signs were missed. Those who followed his career noticed a shift. The man once defined by forward motion slowed. Public appearances became more reflective, messages more centered on awareness, support, and presence. Success, once measured by expansion, took on a different meaning: protection, listening, and connection. What makes Master P's story especially haunting is contrast. He had spent decades building systems to shield his family from instability. Yet mental health does not respond to wealth, authority, or intention. It exists beyond control. Tamika Foster. Tamika Foster was known to the public as a woman who stood beside fame, a stylist, a creative force, and once the wife of global music icon Usher. She lived in a world of red carpets, flashing cameras, and polished appearances. But behind that carefully styled image was a mother whose life would be permanently altered by a single summer afternoon. In July 2012, Tamika's 11-year-old son, Kyle Glover, was enjoying a family outing on Lake Lanier in Georgia. The lake, popular and crowded, was filled with laughter, speedboats, and jet skis slicing through the water. In a moment no one could rewind, a jet ski struck Kyle as he rode an inflatable tube. The impact was devastating. There was no dramatic warning, only shock, confusion, and screams that came too late. Kyle was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support. For nearly 2 weeks, Tamika remained at his bedside, refusing to leave, whispering prayers and promises into a silence that offered no response. Doctors were honest but gentle. The damage was severe. On July 21st, Kyle was declared brain dead. Tamika made the unimaginable decision to let him go. Afterward, her life retreated from the spotlight. Courtrooms replaced cameras as she fought for justice, accountability, and answers. But no ruling could return what was taken. Friends described her as changed, not broken, but permanently reshaped by grief. She spoke openly about survival, about waking each morning with pain that never truly fades. Tamika Foster's story is not one of celebrity tragedy for spectacle. It is a reminder that loss does not discriminate. Water meant for joy became the setting of irreversible sorrow. And for Tamika, motherhood did not end with Kyle's passing. It transformed into a lifelong act of remembrance, resilience, and love that refuses to disappear. Gladys Knight. Gladys Knight built her legacy on endurance. For decades, her voice carried warmth, faith, and survival through generations of listeners. She sang of heartbreak with grace and of hope with quiet power. Yet nothing in her remarkable career prepared her for the day when music could no longer protect her from loss. In 1999, her son Jimmy Newman died suddenly in a violent car accident. He was driving alone when his vehicle lost control and crashed with devastating force. There were no witnesses who could explain why it happened. No final phone call, no warning signs. By the time authorities arrived, Jimmy was already gone. He was only 37 years old. For Gladys, Jimmy was more than a child. He was her anchor beyond the stage, a trusted presence who helped manage her career and shielded her from the noise of fame. His absence created a silence no applause could fill. Friends recall that after his death, Gladys moved differently, spoke less, and carried a weight that never fully lifted. She did not retreat from music, but her performances changed. Each note felt more deliberate, each lyric heavier with meaning. When she sang about endurance, it was no longer metaphorical, it was lived experience. Behind her calm composure was a mother navigating grief without spectacle, choosing dignity over despair. Gladys Knight rarely spoke publicly about Jimmy. When she did, her words were measured and restrained, as if speaking too much might fracture the fragile balance she had built to survive. Faith became her refuge, not as an escape, but as a way to continue breathing through sorrow. Afeni Shakur. Afeni Shakur lived a life shaped by struggle long before the world knew her as the mother of Tupac Shakur. She was a revolutionary, a survivor, and a woman forged in the fires of political persecution. Strength was not a performance for Afeni, it was a necessity. Yet even a woman who endured prison, exile, and poverty could not withstand the moment she lost her son. In September 1996, Tupac Shakur was shot multiple times in Las Vegas after a boxing match. Afeni received the call every mother fears. Her son, the voice of a generation, lay in critical condition. For 6 days, she remained by his hospital bed, holding his hand, whispering prayers, speaking to him as if words alone could anchor him to life. On September 13th, Tupac died from his injuries. Afeni did not collapse in public. She did not perform grief for cameras. Instead, she grew quiet, the silence of a woman whose world had shattered inwardly. Tupac was not only her child, he was her reflection, her legacy, her proof that something beautiful could rise from hardship. After his death, Afeni dedicated herself to preserving his truth. She managed his estate, released his unreleased music, and protected his message from distortion. But behind that public strength was a mother navigating unbearable absence. Friends described her as carrying a permanent ache, a grief that never softened, only learned to coexist. Afeni once said that losing Tupac felt like losing her purpose. Addiction resurfaced, loneliness deepened. Yet she continued forward, driven by love rather than healing. Her life became an act of guardianship over a son who could no longer speak for himself. Eric B. built his legacy in silence. While others chased the spotlight, he stood behind the turntables, shaping the sound of hip-hop's golden era without demanding recognition. Precision, restraint, and control defined his public life. But in 2017, tragedy struck in a way no amount of discipline could prepare him for. That year, Eric B. lost his son, Eric Barrier Jr., in a devastating accident. Details remain largely private, shielded from headlines by a father who had spent decades protecting boundaries between art and personal pain. What was known was simple and brutal. A young life ended suddenly, leaving a silence far louder than any record he ever produced. Unlike public figures whose grief unfolded under cameras, Eric B. withdrew completely. There were no statements, no interviews, no public memorials broadcast to fans. Friends later described him as deeply changed, a man whose calm exterior now carried a permanent weight. Music, once a language of control and balance, became something distant, almost unreachable. Those close to him said the loss redefined his understanding of time. The future no longer felt predictable. Plans lost urgency. What mattered was memory, holding on to fragments of laughter, conversations, moments that could never be recreated. Fatherhood, which had grounded him beyond fame, now became the source of his deepest wound. Eric B. never attempted to transform tragedy into narrative or inspiration. He chose privacy over performance, grief over explanation. In doing so, he reminded the world that not every legend processes loss publicly. Some carry it quietly, with dignity and immeasurable pain. Dr. Dre. Dr. Dre built an empire on control. From shaping West Coast hip-hop to becoming one of the most powerful figures in modern music, Andre Young mastered sound, strategy, and silence. He was known for precision, knowing when to speak and when to disappear. But in 2008, control slipped from his hands in the most devastating way possible. That year, Dre lost his son, Andre Young Jr., at just 20 years old. He was found unresponsive at home after a night of partying. Authorities later confirmed he died from an accidental overdose involving heroin and morphine. There was no warning, no chance for intervention, only the irreversible finality of a life cut short. Andre Jr. was largely kept out of the public eye. Dre had protected his children from fame, believing privacy was a form of safety. But loss does not respect boundaries. When the news broke, the hip-hop world fell silent. For a man who built his legacy on beats and bravado, words suddenly failed him. Dre did not turn grief into interviews or public reflection. Instead, he vanished. Studio sessions paused. Appearances stopped. Those close to him described a man consumed by guilt, questioning what wealth, influence, and power truly meant if he could not protect his own child. Years later, traces of that pain surfaced subtly. His music grew darker, more introspective. His business decisions became colder, more distant. Fatherhood, once something he guarded privately, now carried an invisible scar. Dr. Dre never publicly romanticized his son's death. He did not use it to build narrative or redemption. He carried it quietly, as a permanent fracture beneath success. His story is a reminder that even architects of culture are powerless against certain losses, and that behind every legend is a human being forced to live with a silence no amount of success can ever erase. Marvin Gaye Sr. Marvin Gaye Sr. was a man defined by conflict, a strict minister, a disciplinarian father, and a deeply troubled figure. He lived in constant tension between faith, control, and unresolved anger. That tension reached a tragic breaking point on April 1st, 1984, the day he lost his son, Marvin Gaye, in the most devastating way imaginable. The legendary singer had returned to his parents' home in Los Angeles, seeking recovery and stability. Instead, a long history of emotional and physical conflict resurfaced. After an argument involving Marvin's mother, Marvin Gaye Sr. retrieved a handgun and fired. The bullet struck his own son, killing him one day before Marvin Gaye's 45th birthday. Unlike most parents who lose a child to fate or accident, Marvin Gaye Sr. was forced to live with an unbearable truth. He was responsible. The courtroom later determined the act to be voluntary manslaughter, citing mental instability and years of domestic turmoil. He received a suspended sentence and probation, a ruling that shocked the public and haunted him for the rest of his life. After the shooting, Marvin Gaye Sr. withdrew almost entirely from public life. He sold personal belongings, avoided interviews, and lived quietly, consumed by guilt and isolation. Those who encountered him later described a broken man, not defiant, not defensive, but hollow. Faith, once his weapon of authority, became his only fragile refuge. The loss of Marvin Gaye was not just the death of a global icon. It was the collapse of a family shaped by unresolved pain. For Marvin Gaye Sr., grief was inseparable from responsibility. There was no path to forgiveness without memory, no escape from the silence left behind. Lamar Odom. Lamar Odom's life has always moved between extremes. On the basketball court, he was gifted, versatile, and unpredictable, a champion who seemed capable of adapting to anything. Off the court, however, life tested him in ways no athletic training could prepare him for. The deepest wound came long before fame, fortune, or headlines. In 2006, Lamar Odom lost his 6-month-old son, Jaden Odom, to sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. One night, Jaden was placed in his crib to sleep. By morning, he was gone. There was no illness, no warning, no explanation that could bring comfort. Doctors could offer only a clinical term, not answers. Jaden's death shattered Lamar's sense of stability. Those close to him recall that the loss created a fracture inside him that never fully healed. Grief did not explode outward, it sank inward, quietly altering the way he saw himself and the world. The joy of fatherhood was replaced by an unrelenting question: why? Instead of processing the pain, Lamar buried it. Basketball became refuge and distraction, a place where structure replaced chaos. Success followed: NBA championships, public admiration, celebrity status, but none of it touched the grief he carried. Over time, unresolved sorrow contributed to struggles with substance abuse, depression, and self-destruction. Years later, Lamar would openly admit that Jaden's death was the emotional origin of many of his darkest battles. Losing a child so young left him emotionally frozen, unable to grieve properly, unable to move forward. Healing, when it finally began, came slowly and painfully, through honesty and accountability. Levert. Eddie Levert spent his life singing about love, devotion, and heartbreak, never knowing that the cruelest verses would be written into his own story. As the unmistakable voice of the OJs, he helped define soul music for generations. But behind the harmonies and standing ovations lived a father who endured a pain few survive: the loss of not one, but 2 sons. In 2006, tragedy struck when his son Gerald Levert, a successful R&B star in his own right, was found dead at the age of 40. The cause was an accidental overdose from prescription medications. Gerald was at the height of his career, admired for his voice, charisma, and deep connection to fans. His death sent shockwaves through the music world, but none greater than the devastation felt by his father. Just 2 years later, grief returned with brutal force. Eddie's younger son, Sean Levert, died at 39 while serving a jail sentence for child support violations. He passed away after becoming seriously ill and not receiving timely medical care. An investigation later confirmed negligence, adding anger to Eddie's already unbearable sorrow. Losing 2 children under different circumstances reshaped Eddie Levert entirely. Friends say his strength became quieter, his faith more private. He continued performing, but every song carried added weight, as if each lyric was now a conversation with the sons he could no longer hold. Eddie never allowed bitterness to define him, though pain never left. Instead, he transformed grief into endurance, choosing to honor Gerald and Sean by continuing to sing, not because it was easy, but because it was the only way he knew how to survive. Deborah Lee. Deborah L. Lee was known for composure. As a powerful media executive and the former CEO of BET, she navigated boardrooms, negotiations, and public scrutiny with steady control. Her career demanded resilience, but nothing in business prepared her for the kind of loss that strips power of all meaning. In 2008, Deborah's only son, Kevin Lee, was killed in a tragic car accident. He was just 31 years old. Reports confirmed that his vehicle crashed violently, ending his life instantly. There were no second chances, no final conversations, no opportunity for a mother to say goodbye. Kevin was deeply connected to Deborah beyond family ties. He was intelligent, ambitious, and often described as her emotional center, the one place where success and status did not matter. His death shattered the private world she had carefully protected from public view. Unlike many public figures, Deborah did not turn grief into visibility. She stepped back quietly, maintaining dignity while carrying devastation. Colleagues noticed a shift, not weakness, but a heavier stillness. Her leadership remained sharp, yet something essential had been taken from her life forever. Faith and reflection replaced ambition. Deborah later spoke about grief as a long, silent companion rather than a moment of collapse. Healing was not linear. Some days functioned normally, others carried the full weight of absence. Motherhood, once a source of grounding joy, became a constant reminder of what was lost. George Foreman. George Foreman built his legend on survival. He was a man who fell, rose, and rewrote history, losing a heavyweight title, finding faith, then returning decades later to reclaim glory when the world thought his story was finished. Strength, discipline, and redemption defined how people saw him. But none of those traits could shield him from the quiet devastation that came from inside his own family. In March 2019, Foreman's daughter, Frida Foreman, was found dead in her Houston home at the age of 42. Authorities reported her death as suicide by asphyxiation. The news struck without warning. There was no public struggle, no visible signs that a tragedy of this magnitude was approaching. Frida was not simply George Foreman's daughter. She was a former professional boxer who stepped into the ring carrying both pride and pressure. She fought briefly, then chose a different path, studying and speaking openly about mental health, identity, and expectations. Behind her confidence, however, was a weight she rarely allowed the world to see. For George Foreman, the loss was shattering in a way no defeat had ever been. He had faced knockouts, humiliation, and physical pain, and survived them all. But this was different. There was no opponent, no bell, no chance to protect his child from an invisible battle she fought alone. After Frida's death, Foreman withdrew into silence. He shared only brief words publicly, asking for prayers and privacy. Those close to him described a man deeply wounded, carrying grief with the same restraint that once defined his discipline in the ring. Taraja Ramses. Taraja Ramses lived behind the scenes. His name rarely appeared in headlines, yet his work shaped some of the most powerful moments in modern Black cinema. As a respected stuntman, he put his body on the line so heroes could rise on screen. Danger was part of his profession, but the most devastating blow of his life came far from any movie set. On October 31st, 2023, Ramses was driving in Atlanta with several of his children when their vehicle collided with a disabled tractor trailer on a dark highway. The impact was catastrophic. Two of his children, Sundari, age 13, and Fujibo, just 8 weeks old, were killed instantly. A third child, Kisasi, age 10, survived briefly before succumbing to his injuries days later. Taraja himself was critically injured and remained unconscious, never waking to learn that 3 of his children were gone. The man whose career depended on absorbing controlled violence now lay powerless before a tragedy no training could prepare him for. Friends and colleagues described Ramses as a devoted father who prioritized family over fame. Between productions like Black Panther and Creed III, his life centered on raising his children, guiding them with patience and warmth. That devotion made the loss even more unbearable for those who knew him. Days after the crash, Taraja Ramses passed away from his injuries. In one night, the film industry lost a skilled professional, and fatherhood lost a man who died carrying unimaginable grief he never had the chance to process. His story is uniquely cruel in its silence. There were no final words, no last embraces, no awareness of the scale of loss. Taraja Ramses did not just lose children. His life ended alongside them, frozen in a moment where love and devastation collided. Regina King. Regina King spent decades mastering emotional truth. From sitcoms to award-winning dramas, she built a career on authenticity strength, and quiet authority. On screen, she portrayed grief with precision. Off-screen, however, she would come to learn that no performance can prepare a mother for real loss. On January 19, 2022, Regina King's only child, Ian Alexander Jr., died at the age of 26. His death was ruled a suicide. The news stunned the public, but for Regina, it marked the end of a private world built around a bond few ever fully saw. Ian was more than her son. He was her closest companion. They attended premieres together, shared music, art, and late-night conversations. Regina once described motherhood as her greatest role, and Ian often spoke publicly about the unconditional love he received from her. Their connection was visible, but its depth was known only to them. There were no warning signs made public. Friends described Ian as thoughtful, creative, and deeply introspective. He had just celebrated his birthday days before his passing. The suddenness left no room for answers, only questions that never settle. After his death, Regina King stepped away from the spotlight. She canceled appearances, paused projects, and chose silence over explanation. When she eventually spoke, her words were measured and raw, asking for compassion, privacy, and understanding for families navigating mental health struggles. Unlike many public tragedies, this one offered no spectacle, no controversy, no blame, just absence. Regina's grief did not erupt. It folded inward, reshaping her life in ways unseen. Regina King spent her life teaching audiences how to portray strength, dignity, and emotional truth. Yet nothing in her decades-long career could prepare her for the loss of her only son, Ian Alexander Jr., in 2022. While the world saw an award-winning actress, she lived a quieter reality as a devoted mother whose greatest role was never on screen. After his death, Regina chose silence over spectacle, grief over explanation. In an industry obsessed with visibility, her withdrawal raised an uncomfortable question. Do we truly honor Black excellence when we celebrate resilience, but look away when that strength finally breaks?